Leviticus 21 and 22. And the Lord said unto Moses, Speak unto the priests, the son of Aaron, and say unto them, There shall none be defiled for the dead among his people, but for his kin that is near unto him, that is, for his mother, and for his father, and for his son, and for his daughter, and for his brother, and for his sister a virgin that is nigh unto him, which hath had no husband, for her may he be defiled. But he shall not defile himself, being a chief man among his people, to profane himself. They shall not make baldness upon their head, neither shall they shave off the corner of their beard, nor make any cuttings in their flesh. They shall be holy unto their God, and not profane the name of their God. For the offerings of the Lord made by fire, and the bread of their God, they do offer. Therefore they shall be holy. They shall not take a wife that is a whore, or profane. Neither shall they take a woman put away from her husband, for he is holy unto his God. Thou shalt sanctify him, therefore, for he offereth the bread of thy God. He shall be holy unto thee. For I, the Lord, which sanctify you, am holy. And the daughter of any priest, if she profane herself by playing the whore, she profaneth her father. She shall be burnt with fire. And he that is the high priest among his brethren, upon whose head the anointing oil is poured, and that is consecrated to put on the garments, shall not uncover his head, nor rend his clothes. Neither shall he go into any dead body, nor defile himself for his father or for his mother. Neither shall he go out of the sanctuary, nor profane the sanctuary of his God, for the crown of the anointing oil of his God is upon him. I am the Lord. And he shall take a wife in her virginity, a widow, or a divorced woman, or profane, or a harlot. These shall he not take, but he shall take a virgin of his own people to wife. Neither shall he profane his seed among his people, for I, the Lord, do sanctify him. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto Aaron, saying, Whosoever he be of thy seed in their generations that hath any blemish, let him not approach to offer the bread of his God. For whatsoever man he be that hath a blemish, he shall not approach, a blind man, or a lame man, or he that hath a flat nose, or anything superfluous, or a man that is broken-footed, or broken-handed, or crook-back, or a dwarf, or that hath a blemish in his eye, or be scurvy, or scabbed, or hath his stones broken. No man that hath a blemish of the seed of Aaron, the priest, shall come nigh to offer the offerings of the Lord made by fire. He hath a blemish. He shall not come nigh to offer the bread of his God. He shall eat the bread of his God, both of the most holy and of the holy. Only he shall not go into the veil, nor come nigh unto the altar, because he hath a blemish, that he profane not my sanctuaries, for I, the Lord, do sanctify them. And Moses told it unto Aaron, and to his sons, and unto all the children of Israel. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto Aaron and to his sons, that they separate themselves from the holy things of the children of Israel, and that they profane not my holy name in those things which they hallow unto me. I am the Lord. Saying unto them, Whosoever he be of all your seed among your generations, that goeth unto the holy things which the children of Israel hallow unto the Lord, having his uncleanness upon him, that soul shall be cut off from my presence. I am the Lord. What man soever of the seed of Aaron is a leper, or at the running issue, he shall not eat of the holy things until he be clean. And whoso toucheth anything that is unclean by the dead, or a man whose seed goeth from him, or whosoever toucheth any creeping thing, whereby he may be made unclean, or a man of whom he may take uncleanness, whatsoever uncleanness he hath, the soul which hath touched any such shall be unclean until even, and shall not eat of the holy things, unless he wash his flesh with water. And when the sun is down, he shall be clean, and shall afterward eat of the holy things, because it is his food. That which dieth of itself, or is torn with beasts, he shall not eat to defile himself therewith. I am the Lord. They shall therefore keep mine ordinance, lest they bear sin for it, and die therefore. If they profane it, I, the Lord, do sanctify them. They shall no stranger eat of the holy thing, or sojourner of the priest, or a hired servant, shall not eat of the holy thing. But if the priest buy any soul with his money, he shall eat of it, and he that is born in his house, they shall eat of his meat. If the priest's daughter also be married unto a stranger, she may not eat of an offering of the holy things. But if the priest's daughter be a widow, or divorced, and have no child, and is returned unto her father's house, as in her youth, she shall eat of her father's meat, but there shall no stranger eat thereof. And if a man eat of the holy thing, unwittingly, then he shall put the fifth part thereof unto it, and shall give it unto the priest with the holy thing. And they shall not profane the holy things of the children of Israel, which they offer unto the Lord, or suffer them to bear the iniquity of trespass when they eat their holy things, for I the Lord do sanctify them. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto Aaron, and to his sons, and unto all the children of Israel, and saying to them, Whatsoever he be of the house of Israel, or of the strangers in Israel, that will offer his oblation for all his vows, and for all his freewill offerings, which they will offer unto the Lord for a burnt offering, ye shall offer it at your own with a male without blemish, or of the beeves of the sheep, or of the goats. But whatsoever hath a blemish, that shall ye not offer, for it shall not be acceptable for you. And whosoever offereth a sacrifice of peace offerings unto the Lord to accomplish his vow, or a freewill offering in the beeves or sheep, it shall be perfect to be accepted. There shall be no blemish therein. Blind or broken or maimed, or having a wean or scurvy or scab, ye shall not offer these unto the Lord, nor make any offering by fire of them upon the altar unto the Lord. Either a bullock or a lamb that hath anything superfluous or lacking in its parts, that mayest thou offer for a freewill offering, but for a vow it shall not be accepted. Ye shall not offer unto the Lord that which is bruised, or crushed, or broken, or cut, neither shall ye make any offering thereof in your land. Neither from a stranger's hand shall ye offer the bread of your God of any of these, because their corruption is in them, and blemishes be in them. They shall not be accepted for you. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, When a bullock or a sheep or a goat is brought forth, then it shall be 7 days under the dam. And from the 8th day and thenceforth it shall be accepted for an offering made by fire unto the Lord. And whether it be a cow or ewe, ye shall not kill it, and her young both in 1 day. And when ye will offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving unto the Lord, offer it at your own will. On the same day it shall be eaten up. Ye shall leave none of it until the morrow. I am the Lord. Therefore shall ye keep my commandments, and do them. I am the Lord. Neither shall ye profane my holy name, but I will be hallowed among the children of Israel. I am the Lord which hallow you, that brought you out of the land of Egypt, to be your God. I am the Lord. Let's pray. Dear Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you that we're able to read your word and study it. Lord, I pray that as our pastor comes before the church to present the message that you've given to him, Lord, I pray that you'd use him as your mouthpiece, and he'd say what you have him to say, Lord, and that you just bless him as he studies your word and desires to do your will, Lord. I just pray that you help my dad at work, Lord, help him to have a good day, help him to get a lot of work done, and just be an example of a Christian and how hard Christians should work. And Lord, I pray that you would just bless the day, Lord. Thank you for the good weather we've had in the past couple of days, Lord. And just pray you bless your word and convict us of sin and things that we've done wrong this week, Lord. And just pray you bless the rest of our day. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Daniel. All right. So previously, last few weeks, we've been talking about how things are how we're supposed to be clean, how we're not supposed to defile ourselves, how we're not supposed to associate with the abominations and so forth, and defiled things and wicked things because of the Lord, because we're holy unto the Lord. So we have to clean ourselves, and we have to make sure that we are clean people, that we are not like the world around us, and that we are different. And so we understand the important things of being the congregation, being holy unto the Lord, making sure that the society does not degrade down below a certain level of wickedness, and that we are in, and that the congregation itself has to maintain a high level of, it has to be higher. There's more expected of the congregation of the Lord than is expected of the society in which we live. Okay, so we established that fact. Now, in chapter 21 and chapter 22, we are dealing with things given to the Lord for His divine purposes, for His divine will, from among the congregation, from among the people. And so we previously saw where he's talking about the baseline level of wickedness that's allowed in the society in the covenant nation of Israel, that dealing with the flesh, dealing with the lowest level that's not necessarily acceptable, but before God will unleash his wrath and before God will condemn the nation as a whole. And as long as they stay above that, then they were okay, and that they were all right in that level. But then the congregation, they had that chapter of chapter 19, basically telling the level at which the congregation was expected to be and still be accepted among the congregation. And then it goes on to talk about the penalty for committing the abominations of the nation and so forth. In order that if they commit it, in order for the nation to stay in that land, they had to execute that punishment for that crime. And then also, so going on from clean and unclean and abominations and what's acceptable and what's not, now we go on to the holy. We're going on to the third level, because remember there's the wicked, then there's that baseline and the flesh that's acceptable for the nation, and then there's the congregation that's acceptable for them to where they're supposed to live, and then there is those things offered by the congregation to the Lord for a specific divine use. In chapter 1 here we have the people offered unto the Lord, which are, in Israel, it is generational. It is the sons of Aaron. So remember, the nation is supposed to be a nation of priests unto the Lord. So every individual in that nation could technically, especially as a regular Christian today, can give the gospel. They are all priests in that sense. We all, as Baptists, believe in the priesthood of the believer. So everybody who is saved is a priest. He is a believer. But what he's talking about here is the sons of Aaron. It says, and the Lord said unto Moses, speak unto the priests, the sons of Aaron. So the sons of Aaron are the ones who had an office. They had not only just a part of the Levite tribe, which would be the ministers for the nation of Israel, their whole tribe, but then also it was people that held an office. They had specific duty they had to do. They were given an office in the temple to offer up offerings unto the Lord, giving them unto the Lord on behalf of the people. And so that was their job. That was their office. And so these are not just regular run-of-the-mill priests. These are priests that were given an office. Now, we as Christians, we don't have a situation to where, because Grandpa was the pastor, now Junior's the pastor, and so forth and so on. They all hold the office because of their generation. But rather, remember the Melchizedek priests, they're made priests by an oath, not by dad and mom and all that stuff, father and mother and all that stuff, but rather they are by an oath. And so we understand that our offices are given by an oath in the Melchizedek priesthood, and in the Levitical priesthood it was generational. They were already expected to be believers in the Lord, and they were expected to serve in that office because their family was given that office. It was generational. The nation is generational. The priesthood, the Melchizedek priesthood, is by an oath. And so there's the differences in those priesthoods. The nation of Israel has generational priesthood based upon their physical genealogy. The Lord's church has a priesthood based upon the oath. The man that desireth an office of a bishop, the overseer of the church, he desireth a good thing. In other words, a Levitical priest and a son of Aaron did not have the choice of desiring or not desiring. They were born into that office. That was a physical thing. But with us, it is a desire. It is a choice to have. But there is still, whether you're generational or whether you are by an oath and desire the office, there are still qualifications for those offices. You can't just say, well, I'm just like everybody else, and so I'm going to just, I want to be a priest, and so I'm going to be a priest. They couldn't do it in Aaron's day. They couldn't, and they couldn't do it in, they cannot do it in the church today either, and be accepted by Jesus Christ, their great high priest. And so we as Christians need to realize that we, especially who hold an office in the church, are held to a higher standard. The lost are held to one standard, the level of the flesh. Remember that baseline level. That's their standard. Of as long as you don't go below that line, you're acceptable in society, even though you are not part of the congregation. But the congregation, they are not held to the standard of the lost or the level of the flesh. They're held to the standard of the Spirit. They're held to the standard You are acceptable in this congregation as long as you do not go below this level. But then the high priest, and especially the high priest, but the priests, the people who hold an office in the church, in this case the sons of Aaron in the temple of the Lord, they were not held at the standard of the congregation, they were held at the standard of the priest. For example, in today's day, a person can be divorced and remarried and still be part of the Lord's church. That's an acceptable thing. Now, obviously, those who divorce and marry another, they commit fornication. That's a sin. But the Lord also says that it's better to marry than to burn. If you're going to decide, well, I'm just going to go sleep around with everybody, that's worse than saying, well, okay, I know the first time was a mistake, or there was this reason, or there was abuse, or whatever, and it happened, and then that person went off and married somebody else. It's not something I can undo. Things in life happen. We understand that. Some people will be, how dare you get divorced, whoever you are, and you're not acceptable anywhere. And God cannot use you anymore. No, that's not true. God can use you even if you've been married, divorced, and remarried, and all those things. Now, obviously, if it becomes a standard and a habit, something's wrong, something's going on, you need to take care of that. Oh, my fifth marriage, it's okay, it's all wonderful. No, it's acceptable because obviously, some people, they get married before they're saved and they live the party lifestyle, and then other times they are, and then when one of the individuals gets saved, Paul deals with this. Remember, he says, you're not under bondage. If you can stay with them, stay with them. So that you can sanctify the family and make sure that the rest of the family is holy. Even though they don't accept the Lord, they can still be sanctified, and your children can be holy. But if you leave them, you're not under bondage in such circumstances. Paul is explaining this because what relationship has the lost with the saved? But the desire for Paul is to stay in that marriage so that you can win the lost. You can win the unbeliever. Now, obviously, there's a situation where perhaps both claim to have been saved, but then the husband has a pattern of abuses. And the husband's like, oh, I'm going to beat you, I hate you, I'm mad at you. And he does not control his anger, his wrath. The flesh is swelling up in him. He's acting like a lost man. And the poor lady is trying to do her best to stay with him, but he's just an abuser. There needs to be a period of separation. He needs to stop his abuse, and hopefully they can get back together. But in life situations, whether it's the man or the woman, where there's abuse or where there's they ought to be Christian, but they instead are acting like the world and acting like the lost, there's divorce there. There's certain circumstances to where it's not necessarily the right thing, or the best thing, but it happened. And so people have history, and they can be forgiven of that. And there's still a part in the church for them. It's still acceptable for them to be in the church once they got those things dealt with, and that they have resolved those issues along with that in their particular situation. But your history, while as a Christian can be forgiven you, and you can have a place in the church, and you can also have a substantial role in the church, and to be very helpful in the church, your history will disqualify you from being in the office of a bishop, especially in particular in the matter of marriage. And we're going to notice these things so that there is a different level for the officers of a church to obtain to than it is for the regular congregation. Now, some people are arrogant and rebellious, and they say, well, God's called me to this thing, and therefore, since God's called me, you have no right to say that I cannot be a pastor, I cannot be this. And no, you have to submit yourself to the church, and the church sends you out to be a pastor. The church sends you out to be part of an office. The church sends you out to do these things. It belongs to the church to determine who its officer should be. You as an individual who desires an office, desires a good work, but you shouldn't go around saying, well, I am called by God, and therefore you have no right. Man has no right to tell me what to do. That is rebellion. That you ought to submit to a local church. It's not denominationalism. It's not denying the Lord. Saying the Lord gave to the church to loose and to bind whoever they will. and to give to an office whoever they will. The office is not mine to take. The office is the church's to give. And that office is held by the church in a solemn obligation to make sure that the officers in that church are abiding by the qualifications. Now, obviously, there will be certain circumstances where the pastor perhaps may not align with every single qualification up to an outside source, but it doesn't matter who somebody outside the church says whether or not the person is qualified. It is whether or not that local church believes that person is qualified. Now, sometimes a person may not, to somebody's terminology or ideas, well, he's not qualified because I can blame him for throwing a shoe one day and whatever. The Bible says he must be without blame, and they have an arbitrary blame or something. And so it doesn't matter what an individual thinks about the qualifications. The question is, does that church accept that person's qualifications for him to be the pastor of that church? Everybody else, opinion does not matter in the situation. But so it's the church who determines is qualified for that. It's not the individual. It is not some guy in podunk collar's opinion about it, and therefore I have to obey his opinion and the church has to submit to his opinion. No, the local church submits to their understanding of that qualifications. And as long as that person is qualified and the church is acceptable with them in that office, that's fine. They have held up to that qualifications. Just so as whereas the person who is the lost is held to the standard by the government, their standard by the government, the local church does not hold the lost to that standard, right? It's the government. So too in the congregation, if you have ought against your brother, and the church has the standard of whether or not that person is acceptable in the church. And the pastor can say, hey, this is right, this is wrong, and whatever, and to guide them like Paul did the Corinthians, saying, hey, this guy is not acceptable, you need to cast him out, you need to get rid of him, and I've judged already. So the pastor is leading in that, but then, so the pastor has the obligation to tell the church, make sure, hey, this is the qualifications for that person, we need to vote him in or out or whatever. And then for the offices, it is the church's responsibility. Because the pastor, if he's in rebellion, is going to say, I'm qualified, you cannot do anything about it. So while the pastor kind of leads, just like as Paul says, I have judged already, he can lead in directing and saying, hey, this person needs to be taken out of the church, he's not acceptable, he's brought before the church, and the pastor and everybody makes the determination together. But then as far as qualifications for that pastor, it is not the pastor's job to qualify himself. It is the church's job, and it is by the level of the scriptures, by the church's determination. And that's why we, as members of a church, do the vote. So here in this passage, it talks about the qualifications, first of all in chapter 21, of the priest. And then the second one, chapter 22, is it's basically the holiness of the priest. And then chapter 22 is holiness of the offerings given into the priest for them to use. So it is the priest who's qualified for the holy things to offer up offerings unto the Lord. This is the person that you should have qualified in your office to offer up your offerings, the church's offerings to the Lord. And so the officer of the church in managing the church's resources has to be qualified because he's managing those on behalf of the Lord. And so if a person is not qualified, then your offerings are not qualified. This is why it's important that the church makes sure that they are having qualified officer offering up those offerings, because the offerings are holy unto the Lord, and the officer and the office of the church is holy unto the Lord. These are not things that are in my power to make holy or not unholy, but it's rather it's the church's solemn obligation to make sure that these things remain holy, not before me, not before each other, but before God in heaven according to his word. And so he says, for I am the Lord. He does not say, do these things, otherwise the pastor will be mad at you. Do these things, otherwise your local congregation will be mad at you. Do these things because the king will be mad at you. No, he says, do these things because I, the Lord, require them of my officers. I require them of your offerings. And so in these things, he's dealing with the holiness of things given unto the Lord. And the qualifications for that priest, even though the priest had a generational, he was still held to qualifications. He says, first of all, this passage talks about how that he's not supposed to go to every single funeral and wail and boo-hoo-hoo and all he's missing, because a lot of times, remember, we as Christians realize that to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. It's not a sad thing. He's talking about here being sad for every single person you know. Oh, he died. Oh, I'm always sad. No, you're supposed to be holy unto the Lord. You're supposed to be focused on the Lord. And you should not be focused on death and destruction and sorrow and all those things unless it's a close relative. They give an exception for close relatives and so forth because obviously what you're going to say, well, I'm an officer of the Lord, so I'm not going to go to this or that or the other thing. Now, obviously, as Christians, the officer of the church does funerals, he does weddings, and he does all those things. And so there are a bit of differences between these qualifications in this passage, but here in this passage is particularly talking about people, especially at this time, where they would go spend months and weeks and whatever in black clothing. Well, some passages they always spend time in black clothing, but anyway, they would go around in mourning and rip their clothes, and they would be in a time of sorrow. And for a regular person in a congregation, that'd be just fine. If you got a close friend or whatever, that's just fine. Go to funerals, mourn for the dead or whatever. They're passing on in particular. But we as Christians should not act like we'll never see them again. We just need to realize, hey, if they're gone, we're going to miss them, and there's great sorrow there. But we're going to see them again, so it's a bittersweet time. Here in this passage is indicating people that are just kind of like, oh, well, we'll never see them again. We as Christians ought to act like, yeah, we will see them again. And so somebody's going around in great sorrow for the death of people, and they're never happy. Life is meaningless. We're all dying. Somebody has this melancholy kind of defeatist attitude as a person. They shouldn't be a pastor. They're always focused on death. You need to have a person who's focused on life. And it goes on talking about not to be defiled for the dead among his people. He needs to, remember we talking about defilement, he needs to keep himself clean because of his office. He needs to be prepared for his office at any time. We as pastors need to be prepared to perform our office as the pastor at any time. And when we're going to funerals, we shouldn't act like somebody who's in sorrow. We need to be there for the people who are in sorrow to lean on, right? And so we understand that they cannot be this kind of overly emotional person for everybody. They need to have strong faith so that people can lean on them in their time of sorrow. You cannot have the sorrow everywhere, but you need to be this person that can be able to help them and not defile yourself in that sorrow. And then it talks about also in verse 5, thou shalt not make baldness upon their heads, neither shall they shave off the corner of their beards, nor make any cuttings in their flesh. So every bald pastor out there, no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Like people, it's pretty popular for, we have a relative who's a pastor, or an in-law that's a pastor, or a brother-in-law that's a pastor. He shaves his head and stuff. So it's like, because he got, obviously when you have your forehead bald, I guess, and there's kind of, you got that rim around the side. Huh?
He gets it really shiny though.
Yeah, it gets really shiny. So, but no, at that time it's like when somebody died, you would shave your head and you would throw ashes all over yourself and what was us? We're just dust and ashes. Oh, whatever. No, we're not supposed to be acting that way, and so forth. And so it's not talking about the fashion statement of the day necessarily of just shaving your head because you don't got enough hair to cover your face or whatever. But anyway, the marriage practices of the priest. Now remember, we're talking about the priest here, and now there's a little bit of differences because of the sacrifice and stuff. I understand that, but you understand that these are the foundational things that our qualifications are somewhat based upon. They shall verse 6, they shall be holy unto their God, and not profane the name of their God, For the offerings of the Lord are made by fire, and the bread of their God they do offer, therefore they shall be holy. Now you see this trend today in certain churches for the pastor to come up with a bunch of tattoos all over himself, and he throws a cuss word here because he's so edgy, and he throws a cuss word there because he's so edgy, and look at me, I got my scraped jeans, and I'm ghetto, and I'm whatever, and he got these tattoos, and it's not like tattoos where he had before he was saved or something, and he was a biker, he got converted to Christ, and he's like, yeah, I'm embarrassed about these, I'm covering them up, and it's like, I don't want to, it's not that. It's like, I got these last week, man. Look at my Hebrew letters on my, on my arm, and my bun haircut, and my, it's all this weird hip junk going around that they want to look like the world. They want to look like the guy probably was raised in a Christian household somewhere in like some the whitest neighborhood you can ever imagine, and then he goes into this ghetto place, and then it's like, look at me, I lived the life. It's like, no, you're not. You're not being authentic. You're not being honest. You need to. Here he says, they shall be holy unto their God, not profane the name of their God. They shouldn't be going around trying to be edgy. They need to have a certain standard about themselves. They need to have. They cannot be seeking low. Oh, here's the joke around the cooler the other day. No, you need to be holy unto the Lord. You need to have it in your words as well. They shall not, for the offerings of the Lord made by fire. So if you have a guy who on one mouth is doing edgy words and cuss words, and he's trying to sounds like the lowest denominator on the block, and he is not uplifting himself in his words, and then he's doing that in common, and then the next moment he's offering prayers unto the Lord for you. That thing ought not to be bitter and sweet and all that stuff. You have to have holy words alone. And they shall not take a wife. And so it starts with his words because he is offering up with his words praises unto the Lord and all those things for the church as well. He shall not take a wife that is a whore or profane. Neither shall they take a woman put away from her husband, for he is holy unto the Lord. In our qualifications, it tells us that we're to be the husband of one wife. And people have all their ideas of, well, what's the husband of one wife mean? One at a time. It's just like you're not to be a polygamist. That's all that's saying. When we have a question, we should never in our own mind say, well, what does it mean when an officer of the church is only supposed to have one wife, and then we make up something. Oh, the Greek this, the Greek that, and we only look at that passage. When we have a question about a passage in Scripture, we go back or we go forward and we look and say, what does the Scripture say about the officers of a church, or the officers of the priesthood, or an officer in general that has an office in one of God's stewardships? Then how are they qualified for that office? And then we can figure out how we're qualified for an office. So the Bible says we're supposed to be husbands of one wife. Now, obviously, husbands of one wife, that means, ladies, you can't be the pastor because you're not a husband of one wife. You're a wife of one husband. And so there are some things that are automatically out. Obviously, polygamy is out, but then they go, well, it's okay if they're divorced or remarried. But here in this passage, it makes quite clear what the husband of one wife of a priest is. And so if this is the qualification for a priest in the Old Testament, then do you think God, who changes not, is going to make a different qualification for a different officer, in his church? His covenant is better than the Old Testament. So you would think he would have a higher standard. So here in the Old Testament, the priest's office, that priest, because he is holy unto the Lord, has to take a wife that is not a whore. She's not sleeping around. Now, obviously, there are circumstances that God calls certain. The prophet Hosea, for example, he was called to take a whore for a wife as an example of how Israel was acting with God. And so now, obviously, a prophet is not the same as an officer of the church. A preacher is not necessarily the same as an officer of the church. We're all preachers. We all have different things, but the qualifications for a bishopric, the person who oversees the church, this is what we're talking about. We're not just talking about somebody who goes preaches the gospel, or a prophet who has a different type of office than a priest or a bishop. But here, so if you're like an evangelist or some preacher or something that is going around trying to save souls and stuff, your qualifications are not going to be the same as a bishop. So you need to make sure that that's clear, is that if he's not an officer of the church, there is a different qualification for that. But this is in particular an officer of the church that deals with the offerings of the church, and because the offerings are holy. Now I need to make that clear, because a lot of people, they arbitrarily call everybody who's an officer and everybody who's an evangelist and everybody who is whatever part of the ministry of the Lord, they all call them preachers and generically, which we do preach the word, but what we're talking about is the pastor of a church, the person who holds an office of the church. An evangelist is not an officer of the church necessarily. He is a minister sent out from a church, but that's not necessarily the same thing. Also, the Apostle Paul, he was not an officer of the church per se. He was an apostle of Jesus Christ. He would go preach the gospel and then organize churches, and Timothy would organize. When they organized, they would select elders to run the church that the Apostle Paul had started. And so he was a church planner. He was not an overseer. He was not an elder appointed to that church. Because once that church was established, he went on his way, and then he went to start another church and preach the gospel in another area. Same way with Philip and so forth. They would go to other areas. But the officer of the church would stay there and minister and then take the offerings from that local church to propagate the gospel in their area, being the overseer of that group of Christians, that church. And so here in this passage, we're talking specifically about people that are in offices, and we need to make that clear. They shall not take a wife that is a whore or profane. Now, obviously, even if you are not an officer of the church, you ought not to be profane, whether you're a guy or woman or anybody. But in particular, if you're an officer of the church and your wife is profane and a whore, you got some problems at home you need to take care of. You need to get that office to somebody else. They shall not take a wife as a whore or profane, neither shall they take a woman put away from her husband, a woman that is divorced. For he is holy unto his God. Because he is holy unto his God, the wife also needs to be holy unto his God. Remember when we talked about Abraham and Sarah, and how that they tried to manipulate the situation to get something outside of that covenant between Abraham and Sarah? And God says, no, I've called Abraham, I'm also calling Sarah as well. They call them together. And so the priest, even though the priest is the priest, his wife is supposed to be holy because he is holy. And because that priest is holy is because God is holy. Thou shalt sanctify them therefore, for he offereth the bread of thy God. He shall be holy unto thee, for I am the Lord. And which sanctify you am holy. Because God is holy, that priest needs to be holy. And not only is the wife not to be a whore or profane or divorced. You know, oftentimes people say, well, the pastor's not divorced, but the woman was divorced. You know, sorry, officer of the church has to have a wife in her virginity, and so forth. And we'll get to that in a minute. And the daughter of a priest. Not only is it the wife, but his family. Well, that's the second thing in the obligations of a pastor who desires an office of a bishop. Husband and one wife, ruling his household well. Ruling his household well. Well, the wife is you know, she's holy unto the Lord, but the daughter is promiscuous and she's running around. She's acting like the world. You got problems at the house. You need to take care of those first. This is why I say your house needs to be in order before you can even take up the mantle of the Lord's house. And the daughter of any priest, if she profane herself by playing the whore, she profaneth her father, she shall be burnt with fire. Now obviously that's the question of whether she'd be burned alive or she branded. That's up to, you know, the people at that time. We don't go around burning people alive nowadays, and that's not part of our commission. That's part of the government's thing to do. But anyway, and And he that is the high priest among his brethren, upon whose head the anointing oil was poured, and that is consecrated to put on the garments, shall not uncover his head, nor rend his clothes, neither shall he go into the dead body, nor defile himself for his father, or for his mother, neither shall he go out of the sanctuary, nor profane the sanctuary of his God, for the crown of the anointing oil of his God is upon him. I am the Lord. Now this is important because, remember, our high priest is Jesus Christ, and so once he took captivity captive, he was established in heaven as the high priest through his blood and so forth. So that's why, with the Old Testament believers, they rose in spirit to the Lord and so forth. But then that's why we all die in bodily still, is because he's up there. He cannot be profaned by a dead body. But when he returns again in his role as king, it will be risen again. But he's currently in heaven in that office, because he says, neither shall he go out of the sanctuary. That's quite interesting, that the high priest was not supposed to go out of the sanctuary. And Jesus Christ, once he went into heaven and established himself as a high priest, has been there ever since, not going out of the sanctuary. And then when he dies, it will not be as a priest he's returning as, but as a king. And so that's important to understand and for his return. But and he shall take a wife in her virginity. Now, what did Christ say about the church, or at least Paul say about the church? And he wants to. I've espoused you. I want to offer you up as a chaste virgin unto the Lord at his coming. That's what Paul the Apostle said. And so, take a wife in her virginity. A widow, or a divorced woman, or a profane, or a harlot, these shall he not take, but he shall take a virgin of his own people to wife. Now, what has the saved to do with the lost? Unequally yoked and all that. A widow, or divorced, or a woman profane, or a harlot, these shall he not take, but he shall take a virgin of his own people to wife. So of his own people to wife. So it's the people that he is ministering to. This is because he is a believer, he's serving the Lord. He also needs to take somebody who is also a believer serving the Lord and not profane and so forth. Neither shall he profane his seed among his people. He's not supposed to lay around with other people. He's only supposed to have one wife. Notice that there. He's only supposed to have one wife in her virginity, one wife for life, and so forth. And so this is why a lot of people say, the Mormonism people, they used to say, well, they have to be in their virginity, but we can have more than one wife and all this stuff, and that's not correct. It says, a widow, or a divorced woman, or profane, or harlot, these things shall he not take, but he shall take a virgin of his own people to wife. Neither shall he profane the seed among the people, for I, the Lord, do sanctify him. And the Lord shall speak unto Moses, saying, speak unto Aaron, saying, whosoever be of thy seed in their generations that hath any blemish. Now this next section here is talking about people that are physically deformed. Now obviously, people are like, well, just because somebody's physically deformed, why can't he serve in the office? Well, obviously he needs to be able to, the things, especially a pastor, if he's not able to get around places, and I just preach, that's all I do at the church. There's more to being an officer of the church than just preaching. A lot of people say, well, as long as I can preach, then I can be the pastor or something. Well, if you're blind, you cannot really do things. You need people to do things for you. If you are maimed and you can't walk around and you need other people to minister to you, then you don't make a very good bishop, an overseer, a blind overseer, right? But the thing is that there's qualifications. Why? Because when you are offering the offerings of God to the Lord, you need to look like somebody who is healthy and the best that God has given. Because whatever we're giving to the Lord needs to be the best, the cream of the crop, if you will. So if we're offering to the Lord for our officers and our pastors, profane people, divorced and maimed people, and these are the best we can give you for our offices, O Lord. But he has a good heart, Lord. No, he needs to be physically able to do the office that he's been given. We cannot just be going around giving any old person. Now, obviously, Bob talks about here, it's not like that guy is not a good person. It's just that he has an office that is holy unto the Lord, and from among his brethren. Verse 10, and that the high priest among his brethren. See, these priests are taken up from among their brethren. They cannot just be the worst that we can possibly give to the Lord. We need to have holy and people that are holy and spiritual. Their families are holy and spiritual. And then also physically, you are whole and complete. Now, does that say, well, if God gave you from birth, well, I have this defect from birth, therefore I want to have the office of bishop? No. The thing is that God gave you that handicap for a reason or whatever, and you need to thank the Lord for it and not seek something that He has not qualified you for. And so the same way with the priest, even though they were born in the generation of Aaron, but if they're not physically, God has made them some reason handicapped in that way, He has already automatically determined that person is not going to have this office. And we just need to be accepted of that. If we are maimed or something for that reason, you should not be saying, well, boo-hoo-hoo, I can't be used of the Lord. No, you need to say, hey, God gave me this. How can I use this for the glory of the Lord? And so that's what we need to understand. Because here it says, no man that hath the blemish of a seed of Aaron, he shall come nigh to offer the offerings of the Lord made by fire. So that doesn't mean that the person who is maimed or blind cannot be an evangelist or do the ministry of the work of the Lord, but rather that when he's managing the household of God, that he needs to be physically able to do these things, and he needs to be spiritually, mentally capable of doing these things without having blame and question put upon him. Only he shall eat the bread of his God, both the most holy and of the holy. You see, people that are not necessarily officers of the church, like evangelists and particular people that do certain ministries in the church, it doesn't mean that they can't have part of that offering. Like the pastor says, hey, for this ministry that you're doing, here is your budget. Hey, for your evangelism, here is your budget. Here is something for you to live off of. Here is your bread. Here is your living. That's fine to do. If a church decides to give money to a missionary who's not an officer in their church, it's fine for them to do because they are part of that ministry that are doing a work for the Lord, but the officers themselves are not to be handicapped. And Moses told them to, and only he shall eat the bread of God, both the most holy and of the holy, only he shall not go in unto the veil, nor come nigh unto the altar, because he hath a blemish, that he profane not my sanctuaries. For I, the Lord, do sanctify him. And so we understand these things. So in chapter 22, we're going to, it's talking about the offerings, which includes the priests and everything that you give to the Lord. Because what God wants, the reason why the officers of the church need to have this higher qualification and standard is because we're giving to God the best of what we have. If we are giving to God as a people the best that we have, then when we give an officer or a person the office of the pastor, and he's handicapped and maimed and tortured and blind and or maybe his family is all reprobate and they're no good whatsoever, or that he has a lot of blame in his life, or that he has a lot of he has a previous problems. Maybe he's divorced, or maybe he's remarried, and all these different things. Maybe the wife has some skeletons in her closet, and all these things. And as a regular congregational person, doing the work of a ministry or an evangelist, telling about his story, how God saved him from all these things, and all these tortures, that's fine to do. That's not a problem. But if we are offering up to God in the office, now I'm not saying I'm a perfect person. No, in fact, I'm a church planner. That's what I'm doing. That's my role in the gospel ministry. That's what I'm ordained to. And so when we have an established pastor, when we have an established church, what are we to offer up to God? Somebody who is most qualified. Somebody who best resembles everything the qualifications have to offer. And now, some people make the excuse, well, the reason why I'm a lady pastor is because the men won't step up and do the job. No, I'm not going to touch that one, but the thing is, we as God's people need to look at the qualifications for the offices God has given to us in our church. We need to ask, hey, for the pastor, who is best to have this office? Now, we may have 10, 20, 30, or no people qualified, But we got to ask, who is the best able to have that office? And then we can't say, well, we would much rather have the lame blind man be our officer in the church rather than the person who's completely qualified and physically qualified, because we want to use him for something else. No, God says to give that office the best person. You're going to, as a congregation, you need to offer up the best person you can for that office. So that's why if you don't have a pastor, don't have a person available in your church, that's why you need to look for someone, do a pastor search committee or whatever, and get the best person you can get for that office. Why? Because you are offering unto the Lord a person from among you to the Lord who is supposed to be most holy. Your offerings to God have to be the most holy, the best that you have. And that includes the officer in that church. And he says, when searching out the deacons, the 7 who were to manage the money for the apostles, what did they say about them? He says, search out from among you. And then he gives that list of people to look for that are most qualified, that have the Spirit of God within them, that desire to help the people, and so forth. We need to stop this mindset of saying, well, just because I feel like I should be the officer of that church, then I'm going to have that office. I don't care what anybody thinks. I don't care if I've been divorced. I don't care if there's somebody more qualified. I don't care, that is rebellion. And rebellion is witchcraft. You are deceiving the people if that's your mindset. The thing is that the church, though, needs to look and say, that person is the best qualified for that office. That is who we are offering. Because when you were selecting a pastor, you were offering him up to that office for the Lord's use. So chapter 22 is talking about the offerings of the Lord. Who's qualified for that office? And then who are you going to offer to the Lord for that office? It says, saying to them, whosoever he be of your seed among your generations that goeth unto the holy things, which the children of Israel hallow unto the Lord. Chapter 22, verse 3. Of Israel, hallow unto the Lord, having his uncleanness upon him, that soul shall be cut off from my presence. I am the Lord. So yeah, maybe the guy's qualified, maybe he's available there, but maybe while he's in that office, something's going on in his life. He's temporarily disqualified. Now, sometimes a person needs to get his household in order. He's not able to properly minister in the church. Because he's dealing with the holy things of the Lord. When you are not in proper standing with the Lord, you're going to ruin everything that you are holding holy unto the Lord. This is the problem with a lot of people today, is that they don't hold the things of God holy unto the Lord. The things that are among the brethren, that are offered unto God, need to be delivered to officers that are also holy unto the Lord. It says, what man soever of the seed of Aaron is a leper, or hath a running issue, he shall not eat of the holy things until he be clean. So if somebody is in rebellion or something's going on in their life, until they deal with that, until they get clean again, remember we dealt with the clean and unclean and all that stuff, until he gets clean in his life, I'm qualified to be a pastor, but I don't need to, that means I don't have to abide by the standards of the common people in the church. No, you still need to be clean and not be unclean and not associate with abominations. But he says, whatsoever man of the seed of Aaron is a leper, and he says, down here he says, is unclean, and whosoever toucheth anything that is unclean by the dead, or a man whose seed goeth from him, or whosoever toucheth any creeping thing, whereby he may be made unclean, or a man of whom he may take uncleanness, whatsoever uncleanness he hath. Now you see a lot of these pastors come along trying to be edgy, and they look dirty and disheveled. They didn't take a bath the day before, or whatever, or that morning or the night before, or whatever it is. They're just quite literally, physically filthy. They touch creeping things and they're dirty things and defiled things. And they're like, yeah, man, it's not the flesh that matters, man. It's just the spiritual outlook, man. And they're idiots. They need to go take a bath. And then they can come back and offer the bread of the Lord. You need to be physically clean. Don't get this little thing to where Bible says that it should be both inward and outward, not one or the other. People go to the extremes of the flesh doesn't matter, the spirit doesn't matter, or the flesh matters, or the spirit doesn't matter. A lot of people think flesh matters, doesn't matter, the spirit. And then these Christians go around saying, well, the flesh can look like this, and I can tattoo it up and shovel myself because that doesn't matter. We need to focus on our spiritual life or whatever. No, it's both. Inward cleanses the outward. But anyway. So which hath touched any such thing shall be unclean until the even, and shall not eat of the holy things unless he wash his flesh with water. Until you get it right, you don't have right to partake in the holy things of God. You're getting a pay cut, buddy. You don't have a right to those things. The church needs to practice some pastoral discipline every once in a while. Hey, go home and take a bath. You ain't preaching this morning, brother. Whatever. But I don't know. I don't know if a lot of churches have much guts anymore to do such things. Now, obviously, the officer of the church ought to be qualified enough not to have to be told by his church to go take a bath. Obviously. But that needs to be. It's a solemn duty. The church needs to realize this. And obviously, you can't be nitpicking the pastor. Well, I think he was a little rude, and therefore he was a brawler. He's a little short with me a little bit, so not long suffering or whatever. Being nitpicky. But obviously, there is some obvious disqualification. Not if you go around thinking, well, I think that might be possibly disqualification, and you're just like this. You're not even dealing with your own beam in your own eye, and you're looking for the little splinters and the speck in the pastor's face and whatever. Double honor, remember that. You need to be quite sure that he is in error. But when he is in error, you need to be, as a church, willing to correct that error, not just for his sake or your own sake, but because the things that you're doing are holy unto the Lord. This is a serious matter. This is not something that we should just kind of ficklily say, well, he was qualified and I'm not going to bring it up. No, you need to make sure that we are all qualified because the Lord sanctifies the things that we are using as a church. It goes down the list and says, that which dieth of itself or torn in beasts, they shall keep my ordinances, lest they bear sin for it and die. Therefore they profane it, and the Lord do sanctify it. Now if we in rebellion say these sanctifications and holy things don't matter, and it doesn't matter how my life is as a pastor, and that it doesn't matter, you should mind your own business and all these things. If I'm in rebellion and the church does not deal with it, then it's possible that God will just take me home early. Now this is why we as individuals need to be careful to submit one to another, because if we don't submit one to another, then the Lord will take us away or discipline us. If we discipline one another right now, then we don't have to worry about we don't have to fear the Lord's discipline in those things. But the priest, and it says it talks about who's qualified to partake in that, like the officer of that. If the officer of the church is being paid, even his payment is still holy unto the Lord. Now, obviously, if he has somebody over dinner, given to hospitality and all that stuff, it's still fine. It's fine to do the hospitality. But it talks about here, so if a priest by any soul which with his money he shall eat of it, he that is born in his house, they shall eat of his meat. So everybody in the pastor's house has to be sanctified unto the Lord and meet these qualifications. The pastor and the officer, the officer's wife. That's why the qualifications are for the pastor, and then for the deacon and the deacon's wives and all these things, and then for his family. And anybody who lives in his household that are dependent on that officer has a right to the holy things of the Lord. But it says the priest's daughter be married off and some stranger or whatever, they don't have a right to it. It's like you have all these people that take up an offering from the church, and then, okay, hey, here you go, here you go, hey, here you go. It's like everybody's dividing it among themselves. Oh, look at all the money we got from everybody. Yeah, and there's little special groups dividing it all among themselves. The offerings of the Lord are holy unto the Lord, and they're only supposed to be used for his ministry and for his officers. So if the church as a whole determines, hey, this person is in need, let's give them some money. Hey, this person is in need, let's give them some money, and it's something that's a legitimate need through the church, then that's fine. But if somebody says, oh, this is a tithe unto the Lord, and they individually, randomly decide what to do with it, then that's not right. It's not qualified. But for the person himself, the officer, it's telling us, hey, this is who's allowed to eat of those things. So if the officer is offering up, the priest is offering up an animal sacrifice to the Lord, not just anybody can go and take a portion of that offering. Like, hey, I go up to, like, for example, I'm well able to get myself a meal, and then some guy offers an offering to the Lord, and the priest comes along, and then he got his portion, and I go to the priest's house, and I get all this food, and I bring it home with me. And it's like I'm taking your tithe, and I'm through the back door using it for my own self. That's what a lot of people do in some churches, is that they don't manage the Lord's resources properly. They're just giving it willy-nilly to whoever. They don't need, they don't need having no gospel ministry. Now, if somebody has a gospel ministry, maybe somebody does a service for the church, then they can have, maybe the pastor's hosting somebody in hospitality at their house or something like that. That's not a problem, But it's saying consistently as if somebody is a stranger, but they're acting like as if they are part of that person's house, and they're just living off of those dead people who have deadbeat kids, or not deadbeat kids necessarily, but just deadbeat relatives. And that maybe the mother is working and stuff, but the husband is not working, and the wife, the woman has maybe distant relatives that come up and start mooching off of her and stuff, and she's the only one working, but 10 people in the household are lazy and bums and wine bibbers and drunkards and doing their own thing, living off of her resources. This is what it's talking about, is being sure that, hey, if your officers are working on the Lord, that officer needs to make sure that his things are going to the Lord's things. That we're not just willy-nilly just subsidizing and enabling people to live ungodly. So, for example, if the daughter is going out and about acting a whore, you need to manage your household, you need to take care of her. And if you have people coming and going and randomly taking of your things that were given to you for the service of the Lord, and they're randomly mooching off of you, and you're enabling people to live ungodly, you need to cut them off. Because the holy things of the Lord are supposed to be used to glorify God, including and up to the money offered up for the pastor's salary. They cannot just be going. Now, obviously, if the person, if the guy got like a plumber who's not the greatest plumber or whatever, he's profane or something, he's still offering a service, and getting the plumbing done in the pastor's house is still fine to do, to get, because the service is offered and rendered, and that the money from his salary from the church can be given to that guy for the service rendered. Why? Because the fixed plumbing is glorifying to the Lord, because now the guy has plumbing in his house. So we understand those things, but the thing is here, if we are just randomly giving things and allowing them to use God's money for unholy things, we need to be careful of that, because the offering is holy to the Lord. And it talks about how you should offer it, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto Aaron and his sons, unto the children of Israel, saying to them, Whatsoever he be of the house of Israel, or of the strangers in Israel, that will offer his oblation for all that his vows, and for all his free will offerings, which they will offer unto the Lord for a burnt offering, ye shall offer at your own will a male without blemish of the beeves. Beeves is plural of beef, if you wanted to know about that, of the beeves. And so forth, and it lists down the offerings. Offer at your own will. But whatsoever hath a blemish, that shall you not offer. It shall not be acceptable for unto you. Remember what I'm talking about, is that the things we offer unto the Lord out of our vows and our oblations, the things that we're obligated. The vows are things that we decide willingly to give and promise. That's what faith promise missions is. It's like churches say, hey, if you promise at the beginning of the year to give this amount, and you make a vow, yes, I will give that much this year, and then that's what you keep. And if that's what you keep, you need to give the best of that vow. And the oblations are things like are the offerings that if you sin and you give the offering in the Old Testament, is that you are to give the best for your oblations, the things you're obligated to give. And then the free will offerings, though, is whatever you want to give. And so it says, and whatsoever offer a sacrifice of peace offering unto the Lord to accomplish his vow, or a free will offering unto beeves and sheep, it shall be perfect to be accepted. You can't just give whatever you want for your vows and oblations. Those are already determined. Blind or broken or maimed or having weaned or scurvy or scabbed, ye shall not offer those unto the Lord, nor make an offering by fire unto them unto the altar of the Lord. And then either a bullock or a lamb that hath a thing superfluous or lacking in its parts, that mayest thou offer. Thou mayest offer for a free will offering. Doesn't mean that you cannot give those things. It's just saying that for the specific, if it's a, it doesn't mean that somebody cannot, who's maimed cannot serve the Lord. But it says that basically if an officer of the church that you're offering up from among the brethren is going to an office, it needs to be perfect before the Lord. If a vow that you vow, it needs to be perfect before the Lord. If it's an oblation that God requires, it needs to be exactly what God requires. But if it's a free will offering, it can be whatever you want it to be, because it's your free will in that section. And so if you want to freely give something that God's determined for an oblation, then you need to give it as the way God has said it. But if you just want to freely give something for the Lord to use, you're not going to use it anyway, and it's something extra, you go right ahead. So if somebody, same way with an officer in the church, the officer has to be qualified in those qualifications. But if somebody says, hey, I want to serve the Lord in my time, and just every other day or every day going for such amount of time, soul winning, it doesn't matter that guy's blind or lamed or maimed or whatever. He can do whatever he freely wants to do with his time. He can do whatever he freely wants to do with his money. It was given to him. He can do it. He go right ahead. You shall not offer unto the Lord that which is bruised, crushed, or broken, or cut. Neither shall you make any offering thereof in your land. So it's making clear that whatever we offer, whether it's a person, whether it's our time, whether it's our offering, it needs to be what God has required of us. It needs to be that determined. And we should never have this attitude of, well, they should just be glad that I'm willing to do anything at all. It's like, well, good for you. I mean, your pride and rebellion expect you to be blessed by God, huh? But when a bullock or a sheep or a goat is brought forth, then it shall be 7 days under the dam. There is a certain age limit. There was a certain age before the animal could be offered. And whether it be a cow or a ewe, they shall kill it, and you couldn't kill the mother and the cow, the calf in the same offering as well. That was another thing. We're not going to deal with that today. And when you offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving unto the Lord, offer it at your own will. Offer it at your own will. And so this is so these things have to be done willingly. We have to get these things willingly, not of guilt or anything like that. On the same day it shall be eaten of, you shall leave none of it until tomorrow. I am the Lord. Therefore shall you keep my commandments and do them. I am the Lord. So when we offer up from among the brethren an officer for the church or an offering from the church, it needs to be according to the commandments of the Lord, and it needs to be according to the qualifications of the Lord. And we should not act in rebellion as if we're doing God a favor. We're not doing God a favor, giving him the halt, the maimed, the blind, and all these things. For our offices, as for our best from the church. For I am he that brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord. We notice here that the children of Israel did this because God saved them physically from the land of Egypt as bondmen, as that. But just what they were required to do for their offices, and then we who are saved by God, a greater sacrifice, and saved spiritually, and yet we cannot do better than the Levitical priesthood. We cannot do better in our qualifications for our pastors. And we don't have time today, but those qualifications for pastors can be found in 1 Timothy chapter 3 and Titus chapter 5, or Titus chapter 1. And so, as time permits, you can look at those qualifications and say, hey, that's what we need as officer of our church. When we organize, when we have everything prepared, that's who we're going to seek to be an officer of this church. Whether it's a pastor, whether it's a deacon, whatever office this church decides to have, those are the qualifications. And the closer that person is to those qualifications, the better that church will be before the Lord. Obviously there are some questions about what's this and what's that, and what does this mean or that mean, and that's up to that church to decide. And it's up to them to be honest before the Lord and who they offer up as their sacrifice unto the Lord. So that's the thing. As believers, we need to hold the officers and our offerings that we give to a higher standard than we use for our own selves. Because why? Because we're giving them unto the Lord for His divine use and purposes. Are we going to give God the best we have from among us? Or are we going to give Him the halt, the blind, the lame, and we say, hey, I got to go feed this, I got to do that, I got my own life to live, I'm going to give you my leftovers, God. No, we're going to give Him the best we can. That's what we're going to do. We're going to give people to the offices that are most qualified to handle the holy things of God so that we can bring many souls to glory. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you, blessings you gave to us, Lord. I just pray that you'll help us to understand the importance of keeping holy things separated to the Lord, qualified in the best way possible before the Lord, and not just our own ideas, our own thoughts, but rather because you are the Lord, you deserve the best, and that includes and starts with those people in your offices and those things we offer up to you, whether they be people, whether it be our time, whether it be our talents, whether it be a treasure. You deserve the best from our vows, our obligations, and also from our free will offerings and those things you've given to us to use for your glory. Lord, help us to be wise stewards of your things. And just I pray.